Hey everybody, welcome to the second installment of Cities Ideas, or City Ideas. In today's one, it's nothing too crucial. We're just putting down overhead power lines, or hydro corridors, which is what we call them here in Canada. And the way we're going to get started is we're going to be deleting what we had here already. I sort of played around with it a little, and we're going to be putting down the substation next to our nuclear power plant, which is where most of our power comes from, and we're just sort of going to detail it a bit, putting down gravel and fences and stuff like that. Essentially what these do is they take the power and it transfers them into the overhead wires, which is we're going to be using the network assets that are relatively new on the workshop after the I think it was the Park Life update, or even the one before that, where custom networks became a thing. So now we have actual draggable power lines, which is pretty awesome. Now obviously these are pretty high voltage, so we're going to be surrounding it with a chain link fence, and unfortunately the network fence asset wasn't released yet. My bad idea. So I was just using the prop, and because this is pre-recorded, I recorded this a while ago, just sort of, I don't know if I was going to release it or not, but why not? And yeah, so I'm just surrounding it, and then there's like a sign there that was apparently a part of the actual model, so I'm just putting down the telephone pole over there, so it sort of hangs on that, I guess. And then from there, we're actually going to be dragging our power lines. Now, so basically, the actual metal support structure for the wires, it's called a pylon, so it's like electrical pylons, and depending on the look, they carry a different voltage, and City Skylines doesn't handle that, like it doesn't understand that, so it's really just up to the user for putting them down correctly. And I tried to, just so it makes sense. You'd have the highest amount of voltage coming from the nuclear power station, and then as you sort of spread out and as it gets, most of it would probably go to downtown, and then the suburb would probably get less, so you'll see that later on. But yeah, I'm just trying to be logical with it. And then here we're going to cross the river, actually, and what I did actually later on is I didn't put down any support structures for the pylons, so they're sort of just by default buildings and stuff like that in City Skylines just sort of extended, and it becomes this gray blob or whatever as it goes down. So the pylons don't have any support structures. So what I did later on, and you'll see in the cinematics, is I used some of Ronix's breakwaters to support each row of them, and I think it turned out pretty cool. And you could see at the top of the video, hopefully, that before now we were only using underground, what are they called, underground power lines, which is just a whole bunch of buildings that you place, and they sort of, the electricity connector thing or whatever, because every building has this sort of range of electricity where it connects to other buildings, and you don't have to constantly put down power lines. And so that's what I did. I carried it, but I don't know, I decided to remove it, as you can obviously tell. So what I'm doing here is basically I'm taking the trees that surround the hydro corridor, I'm just removing them with the tree brush. I just try to get the width, to surround the actual corridor, and then I set it to full strength and remove them, because that's what it's really like. If you look at Google Maps or something, turn on satellite mode so you can actually see the ground, and then you look and you'll see these really long lines, and they're very defined, that sort of cut through the trees and the forest and stuff, and that's the hydro corridors, that's the power lines going through. And here was also a bit of an interesting thing. You can see that it sort of crossed the highway, and I wasn't sure if it was tall enough. And you can always use Move It to raise and lower the power lines, because they're nodes, and so they're raisable and stuff. It's just page up and page down don't work by default. You have to do it in Move It. And then here's an example of it sort of transferring, right, the big power line, the big electrical pylon to the smaller one, because the voltage technically doesn't need to be high, or whatever, that doesn't matter. Here's an example of it becoming smaller, but you can see the power lines, the way they work is the lines, they always, they stay the same height as the last pylon. So if your last pylon was shorter than your next one, then the power lines won't connect properly. And if it was taller, then it will be above the pylon and it won't connect properly, which sucks, of course, but I mean, you just have to deal with that. And I think there was a way you could raise or lower the wires, but you can't anymore. So, whatever. And then, yeah, you can see that basically over here in some places, I just sort of went and, like, you just put power lines down. I don't know what else to say. Here's a sort of industrial thing. So obviously here they'd probably be using a lot of power because it's an industrial. They have machines and stuff and everything. So I put another one of these substation things down, and I think I covered. Yeah, it's also gravel this time. And then we're gonna be just putting wires from there. It's gonna cross the whole railroad junction thing. You'll see. And it'll just connect to the power lines again. Obviously, this is pretty simple stuff, and I don't know if I even had to make a video on this, but I thought it was pretty interesting, and maybe some of you hadn't thought of doing this, so why not share this, I guess. Surface painter is nice because if you ever have something like a substation, right, where it's this sort of square gravel patch of, you know, whatever, and it doesn't really make sense just to have that perfect rectangle of gravel. Where you can do with Move It is you just sort of, you set the brush to single, and then you just sort of erratically move it around until it creates a sort of nice spread out from there. Like you could see it looks kind of, I think it looks better, whatever, just a thing that I do. Now also, if you haven't noticed, power lines don't really turn because they're wires. Wires can't curve. So instead what you have to do is you have to sort of make these square kind of movements, and the turns are really just angles. And that's what it is in real life. So if it looks kind of weird, that's how it's supposed to be. And yeah, over here too, I don't know, I feel like power lines, they have some maintenance going on sometimes, and I think if it's close to a gravel patch like the railroad, you'd have some spread out towards there. And I put down this gravel texture near like big sort of, I guess, intersections of wires, just sort of areas where I guess there would be some movement going on there, where it would make sense for the gravel to be there. And what I do later on as well is I take the ore brush, or whatever it's called, and I think it was the oil brush, actually. I don't remember which one it was, but then you'll see it in the cinematics, and I sort of dragged it across the power lines and gave it a nice texture under it, I guess, just to highlight it a little more. And yeah, you'll see that. That's pretty much it for this episode. Obviously, it's pretty simple stuff, like I said, but whatever, you know, might be interesting to some of you. If you like the video, consider letting me know by leaving a comment or leaving a like, or a dislike for that matter. And if you like this sort of content and want to see more, then why not consider subscribing? And yeah, that's pretty much it. See you next time.